So on February 24th, 2009, I received a personal message from reyty2. He says, "I can sense a general philosophical basis of all your thoughts on human rights, energy, holistic analysis, etc. If you don't mind, could you make your philosophy explicit, please? If not, that's alright too. Thanks for considering." So, what a great opportunity to make a video that I've been wanting to make for a long time, which is a video sort of about philosophy, and specifically my own philosophy. The reason it's taken me so long to make this video was because when I was sent that message, my philosophy was still really molten, and I think in a lot of ways it still is, and I think that's healthy. Actually, I think philosophy should always be fluid and in a state of malleability, because this kind of relates to sort of what I've been learning lately about philosophy in general, and that would have to be that as far as everything in the known universe is concerned, energy seems to be more focused on transformation and adaptability rather than endurance. So I think in a way that's kind of insightful in regards to philosophy, that philosophy needs to be adaptable because everything in the universe is adaptable on some level and is constantly changing and adapting. Therefore, it kind of seems ridiculous to have a static philosophy, because ultimately what happens is context changes and then the philosophy becomes sort of obsolete. And for those who continue to maintain that philosophy, a couple of things happen. One, they quickly get sort of left behind as reality and the context sort of changes around them, and two, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to maintain that philosophy, and in fact it eventually becomes unsustainable in my opinion. So that's sort of the intro. I kind of started out asking myself for this video just the basic question, what is philosophy? Or specifically, what does reyty mean when he's asking about my philosophy? So I looked at the dictionary definition and I sort of chose number 5 because I felt that it was the most sort of elegant, compact definition that applies to the question, and that definition is a system of principles for guidance in practical affairs. So that's the basic definition that I chose to go with. As for sort of my elaboration on that, I have quite a bit to say about that, but I'll try to keep it as focused as I can. I think philosophy is sort of an exploded view of a classical argument, which is science versus intuition. And notice that I'm saying intuition there rather than faith or religion or any other sort of speculative kind of branch of ideology that you might choose to substitute for that word, mainly because I think intuition is probably a little bit more specific and focused, mainly because it has to do with sort of instincts, and on a quantum level I think there's a little more validity to intuition than there is to blind faith. And I have sort of a controversial statement that I came up with while I was developing my philosophy, and that is that philosophy is the ultimate science. Now let me explain that. Basically, I think that advanced philosophy is really a combination of intuition and science. You could say that it is science guided by intuition, and inversely it is intuition guided by science. The problem with classical science, in my opinion, is that even with empirical information and basically enforcing theories and ultimately, proving them to a degree to where they become like a law, is inherently flawed in a chaotic universe where things are proved to our satisfaction, but statistically there's always going to be an element of uncertainty there. So really what you have, even with the most respected and absolute forms of science, you still have the potential there that, it's a very small, most would say negligible percentage, but ultimately you still have uncertainty there. And I think that is paralleled in philosophy, because with intuition you don't really have empirical evidence necessarily. What you have is experience, and you have sort of the subconscious understanding that I consider to be quantum, that basically transcends empirical information, and basically it's like a shortcut in a lot of ways. The way I think of it is that the brain is crunching the numbers, is doing the neural networking and interacting with the quantum fields and so forth, and is therefore divining its own conclusions from empirical information that is stored in the neural net. So in that sense, philosophy and science are sort of similar, although I think it's really a slippery slope and dangerous to say that they really connect in any concrete way, because there's obviously quite a bit of difference between empirical science and intuition, which is basically can run the gamut from full-on superstition to being 100% right without any form of physical calculations or empirical analysis. So that's sort of my controversial statement. The reason that I feel that way is because essentially, as I said before, science has an inherent uncertainty. Therefore, to really have something that is superior to science, you need sort of that X factor, which is intuition or the quantum interaction. The fact of the matter is, I don't think we will ever have computers that are advanced enough to replicate the kind of, or interact on the same level as our brain does on a subconscious level with the universe. So I think we'll always have sort of an edge there as far as intuition goes, which is why philosophy, it may take 1,000,000 years using science to prove a particular theory. With intuition, it's possible for our brains to provide the answers immediately, and even though there's no proof, there's no scientific basis, we still arrived at the answer. And so that's why I believe that philosophy is kind of like the ultimate form or evolution of science, as long as it's also guided to a degree by science, and intuition is inversely guided by science. So I think in regards to my philosophy, the 20th century was all about specialization. It was sort of like the scientific revolution and this understanding we have this tremendous power and potential. Science can take us places that we never would have imagined were possible, and there's evidence all around for that. The example of this that I'm making this video right now is a pretty profound sort of example of what science has realized. So there's sort of no denying that reality. And but at the same time, specialization is kind of a flawed long-term strategy because it creates myopia, and even though you become incredibly advanced in any given field, you're still sort of failing to address the interconnections between the specializations. So that was my sort of aha moment for me in my research, realizing that I was being blinded by specialization. So sort of going into the 21st century and branching out, I think my philosophy sort of is focusing on holism, and basically I can sum that up in one little phrase, which is context is everything. And that's sort of this pervasive theme that has been in all of my research, that essentially focusing on individual elements is useless in terms of truly understanding how things work, and you really have to focus on the context. Oh, that's very difficult because context is so nebulous and vast that it's very difficult for humans to consolidate and to make a meaningful predictive model out of all of that information. So that's kind of where my philosophy ends and my research begins. I'm just kind of still in the process of exploring in that direction and just sort of trying to let me see where we have, focusing on the connections and the patterns between the full spectrum of philosophies rather than any individual philosophy. And I think that is sort of the strength of my particular branch of research. I consider holistic thinking, which is where instead of trying to focus on a certain direction and follow that through, what you're really doing is focusing on the context and then following the various patterns and channels that are formed by that contextual model to specific conclusions within that space. So it's still specialized, but instead of coming at this specialization from the source and moving outward, you're starting at sort of the outer limits and moving inward from that, and that I think gives you more accurate predictive models to work with. So that's my philosophy video, and thanks reyty2 for asking me such a great question so that I can make this video, and thanks for watching.